So today we are going to be starting off with my next Stephen King read, literally piggybacking right off of Firestarter, like same day, minute or so in between clips. But today we're, like I said, working through Roadwork. So I'm going to first go into the background of it, go into some of the ideas about what the book's about, stuff like that. I am supposed to be working at the moment, but I wanted to take a little bit of a break because I've been working very hard this morning. So I'm going to quickly try to run through this. I know nothing about this one other than the fact that it's another book that King wrote under his name Richard Bachman, which, if you don't know, is King's pseudonym that he used for about 5 years or so before his pseudonym was found out. On to Roadwork. So this is a thriller novel that was published in 1981. It takes place in an unnamed Midwestern city in 1973 to 74. And the synopsis is basically that there's a man who grieves over the death of his son and the disintegration of his marriage, and he's driven to mental instability when he learns that both his home and his workplace will be demolished to make way for an extension to an interstate highway. Apparently, it's looking to be made into a film, and it looks like Andy Muschietti, who was the director of both It and It Chapter 2, the newest iterations of those movies, and then also Barbara Muschietti, who is his sister. They are going to be producers of the film adaptation of Roadwork, and then Pablo Tropero is being hired to direct. There is some comments from King that I'll go into. He says that, "I think it was an effort to make some sense of my mother's painful death the year before. A lingering cancer had taken her off inch by painful inch. Following this death, I was left both grieving and shaken by the apparent senselessness of it all. Roadwork tries so hard to be good and find some answers to the conundrum of human pain." That's really sad, actually. So this was kind of his way of trying to deal with his mother's unfortunate passing. He also described his disappointment with the work and stated that he was of two minds about having it reprinted, but decided to in the end in order to give readers an insight into his personality at the time. In an introduction to the second edition of the Bachman books, he stated that he changed his mind and that Roadwork had become his favorite of his early books. I am going to probably have a hard time with this because, you know, it's going to be about a man who's basically driven into insanity because, you know, everything is breaking down around him. He loses his son, his marriage is in shambles, and then his home and his workplace are going to be basically taken away from him in order to build this new highway. So that's going to be pretty awful, and I'm going to assume that it's going to be something that's going to rip my heart out. So that's all I'll say about this for right now. I'm excited to start it later today once I get onto another break from work. Apparently, the book itself is very short. The original paperback was about 274 pages. I don't quite know how long it is, though, for my copy, because I borrowed an ebook version from my library in order to do this because I don't have this book on my own. So we'll see how quick this one goes. So I've got a bit of a lull period right now with work. It's already now after 3 o'clock, so I've only got about an hour left, and I wanted to talk about this before I had therapy today after work. Also, peep my new shelf that I built myself, screwed into the wall myself, put all my pop Funkos on. Very proud of myself for doing that yesterday. Anyone who has read or watched the play Death of a Salesman, I'm getting major Death of a Salesman vibes from this book, and I think that a lot of it is because of the mental instability of the main character. And it's clear very, very early on from even just the opening scene that there's something not quite right with him, because the opening scene is him going and purchasing guns and ammunition. It is a bit of a thriller in a sense because this man, like, he has this kind of dialogue go on in his head. There's two voices, Freddie and George, and they kind of are the things that are like, you know, the real dialogue besides the rest of the actual physical dialogue that's in the book. And this main character, he basically tells the gunsmith that he's talking to that it's for his cousin, and he's buying these, like, he basically lies saying that these guns he's buying are for somebody else, but they're for him. And it's not clear as to why he's getting the guns at this point, but we then learn throughout more of the book that there's something not really right with him because, I mean, obviously he has these voices in his head that are like an ongoing dialogue, which is not uncommon for many people. I feel like I have an internal dialogue all the freaking time. Truthfully, like, the rest of the book goes into this whole thing about how the main character, he is like not necessarily owner, but he's like an operating chief of sorts of this laundromat in town. And there's this big construction company that is saying that they want to build this new highway that basically will plow through not only this laundromat that this man operates, and I guess he's kind of an owner of sorts, like he runs the place, and his actual home that he and his wife are living in. Now, there's a lot of like animosity with that because he doesn't want to give any of that up. He thinks it's absolutely stupid, doesn't really think that it's a good idea. And I think too, this is one of the big reasons why this brings a lot of Death of a Salesman vibes to this, is because in Death of a Salesman, the main character is so resistant to change. He's so resistant to the things that are changing around him. It's a play that basically is about, you know, all of the changes that are happening in the modern day, how like technology is starting to kind of come around. Like, it was back in the 50s, mind you, but there were a lot of things happening in the 50s that had been massively changing for a lot of people. Door-to-door salesmen were kind of still around, but they weren't as like looked at that time. They were kind of being outsourced because these companies were, you know, creating products that they could sell through TV and advertising, as opposed to using door-to-door salesmen like, you know, like most companies did back then. So Death of a Salesman is all about this main character who basically starts to go insane because he can't cope with the changes of his business life and his personal life, and he also can't cope with the changes that are happening in his family. All his kids are growing up, they're not really kind of involved anymore, and he's like losing his grip on reality. That is what this book feels like to me. Like, the whole way it's set up, the main character, how he feels to me, like I'm getting some major vibes from that. And I don't know if that's because King had referenced Death of a Salesman for this, but it's very clear that there had to have been some inspiration from it, because the main character is almost exactly like the main character from Death of a Salesman. Like, he is so set in his ways. He wants things to be how he wants them. He doesn't want things to change, and basically he's trying to find ways to combat that, which may involve the guns he purchased. I don't know. That's kind of what it felt like to me, like he was getting them for a specific purpose. But then the whole thing with his wife is that we see like there is some kind of tension between the two of them, but the synopsis does say that, you know, the marriage starts to disintegrate. They did lose a child, which that hasn't been clearly described as of yet. I'm almost 100 pages in at this point today, and it's on my phone, so like the pages are going by a lot quicker because they're shorter. I think in reality the book is much shorter than the ebook lends me to believe, but I think it's because of the fact that the pages are so much shorter and there's not as much text per page as it would be in like a physical copy, because according, like I said, Wikipedia, the physical copy was like just under 300 pages. On my phone, the book is supposed to be like 580 some, but that also included all of like the title pages and the table of contents. At this point, there's still a lot of unanswered questions. I do really, really like this writing style a lot. It truthfully is very strange because it doesn't feel like Stephen King. Like I had said in the video I did for The Long Walk, which was another Richard Bachman book, that the writing style of that book was very synonymous with what I knew of King from that time. Like, from everything I had read up to that point, it felt very similar to a lot of King's work. This one feels kind of different. Like, I mean, I know it's still King in the back of my mind, but the way that this character talks and the way that the story is actually written, like the actual sentences almost feel very different than what I would believe King would have written. But you know, it does have that kind of creepy factor, that kind of weird factor about it that does make you think like there's something not fully right. Like, I don't think this is going to have anything supernatural involved or science fiction based. I think this is just going to be looking at a man's descent into insanity because of the fact he's not willing to change and everything's changing around him into this new modern world, and how he can't cope with it. Like, that would actually be a very interesting like thriller story of in a sense, maybe bordering on the psychological thriller of sorts. I almost, though, at this point would even hesitate to say it's a thriller, only because I don't get that vibe as of yet. I just can see that, you know, there's potential for it to be a thriller if this main character goes down a very, very dark path, in terms of trying to keep things the way they are and fighting for his home and his business that he's built and that he's worked with for years now. So far, not too bad. Really like what is going on here. I wouldn't even say it's slow. Like, I feel like, for me personally, like a lot of people I think that would read this would say it's very slow moving. But for me personally, I really like this. I think the pacing's very good. I think I'm gonna read some more of it tonight if I get a chance. I'm not 100% certain on that though, mostly just because I don't know how things are gonna go after I do therapy, because I'm not feeling under the weather per se, but I'm very tired. We'll catch up with you guys again when I've made some more progress, probably when I feel like I've got about halfway through the book, and we'll kind of go from there. But as far as things go, almost 100 pages in, pretty interesting. Not sure where it's gonna go, but I'm very intrigued. Hello everyone. It is about 1:25 in the afternoon on Wednesday the 25th. I keep thinking it's Thursday for some reason, and that's because I got paid today as opposed to being paid on Thursday, which is normally what happens. But because tomorrow is Thanksgiving, I got paid today because otherwise it wouldn't go through with the bank and everything. So anyway, so I'm all kinds of whacked up today. Like, I keep feeling like I'm supposed to go do my Black Friday shopping tomorrow, but no, it's only Thursday, so I still have like another day between purchasing stuff today that I could and then on Friday. Anyway though, today I wanted to talk about where I'm at with Roadwork. So I am over halfway done with this. I think I'm closing in on about 75% of the way through the book, and I actually really like this book. The one thing I don't care for is the wife of our main character Bart, because it's explained in the synopsis that the two of them have like a marriage in shambles, and basically it's because of Bart's slow instability, you know, growing over the course of like these few weeks leading up to like Christmas, and the book ends like in the new year basically. So the thing about her is that she seems to be a pretty fine woman, okay, like when we first meet her, and then when she finds out that Bart had resigned from work, she's all up in arms, which I don't understand, and her whole attitude towards him basically is completely unwarranted, I think, because leading up to this point, it seemed that their marriage was pretty good. Like, they had a really good marriage, and if they had issues, they worked through them, like any normal couple would. And I understand that, like, you know, finding out that your spouse is resigning from work almost at the drop of a dime is pretty scary, considering you're going to have to find a new place to live because your house is going to get demoed in order for this new road to be created. Like, I get that, but the way that she basically went to, like, she didn't even get to discuss anything with him. She literally just broke down in tears and said she wanted to separate and possibly have a divorce, like, instantly. And I think that that was really uncalled for. I feel like this is a situation where, like, yeah, you would be probably pissed, but you would have to talk about it and figure out what's going on in order to figure out where to go next. Now, I feel like the whole attitude that the wife has going through this is also just, you know, while they're separated, she's very cold, and it doesn't make sense because that's not how I think that, you know, a wife that cares about her husband mentally, physically, emotionally, anything like that, you know, it's not something that I think would be necessarily realistic. However, and this is a big caveat because I don't know if this is the intent of the piece. This is a story about a man who basically descends into insanity. Is it possible that the way the wife is described as reacting, as talking, all these things, is it possible that because this character is already kind of unstable, that he's only seeing things as he believes it to be, where like his wife might actually be trying to help and all he sees is her attacking him in these things? I think it is. I think of it this way. Like, if I'm already feeling very anxious, if I'm already not feeling like I'm where I need to be, like I feel like I am struggling, I feel like everybody's out to get me. I seriously, that's how it is. It's all or nothing, 0 to 100 very quickly. So it would make sense to me if King decided in this story that that's how he's going to see everybody react. Not everyone's going to react that same way, but the thing is like, you know, with the people that he feels like he cares about the most, they're reacting in a way to him that seems cold, angry, hostile almost, and I wonder if that's because of the way that his brain is now, that he just sees everybody acting that way to him, when in reality it's not the case, and like all this guilt he has that he's built up over the course of time is also eating away at him. I'm not 100% certain whether or not that's the case or not, but if that was to be the case of what's happening, if, you know, this wife character isn't really as cold as she seems to be, he just thinks that she is because he feels that everyone is out to get him, you know, that would make a lot more sense in terms of the very hostile nature of the wife character, because otherwise she seemed to be very much a normal individual. So I don't know. It's possible it could be something that is deeper than it looks on the surface. So I really like this for a lot of reasons, but I also am like hesitant to say what like I would rate it, because I don't truthfully know how the book ends. I don't know what happens from here. So I think it's going to all depend on how the ending goes with how I rate it. But at this moment in time, I guess I could say that like it's a 4 stars so far. I really, really like it. I think there's a couple issues I had, like I said, that I'm not sure whether or not, you know, the book is supposed to go like one way or the other in terms of how the wife is supposed to be perceived, and, you know, the fact that we have a very unreliable narrator of sorts. Like, I like the unreliable narrator trope, don't get me wrong, but I really want to empathize with Bart in a lot of ways, but him lying all the time about these things is making it very hard. So I don't know how I feel about him. I don't know where I am on the fence with him. So that's kind of some just pretty general thoughts in terms of like what the book's about. So, okay guys, so it is now Saturday the 28th. Excuse my hair. This is not exactly how I wanted it to look, but I just kind of threw it up so it was out of my face while I read. And I just finished Roadwork. So my overall thoughts on this are that I think it's a really interesting story. It's a lot smaller than it seemed, because like I said before, the ebook version I had, because I was reading it on my phone for the most part and then switching off to my Kindle here every now and then, the page counts were kind of different. It's more of like a 200, less than 300 page book, but the ebook version that I downloaded from my public library on my phone was more of like 548 pages. That's just kind of the formatting and how it ended up being, but it wasn't nearly as much on my Kindle. But the weird thing was too was that my Kindle then wouldn't even give me like an exact page amount of how much the book was. It was every chapter, it would say how many pages were in the chapter, and it would be like one of so many, like 1 of 2 pages, 1 of 3 pages, whatever it was, and it would like count through each individual chapter. So I'm not 100% certain exactly how many pages this was supposed to be. I think I said it earlier in the video, but I don't remember as of now. But I am going to be going off of the ebook version I had that I would see on my phone, so pretty much like 548 pages or 548 screens of my phone. As far as the story goes, I really liked this a lot because it's really short compared to a lot of King's other work. It's told so well that it didn't need to be longer. This is one of those books where I am fine with the length of it. There's a lot of times where like stories that are like 300 or so pages, I feel like a lot of times just felt like they needed way more added to them to feel like the story made sense. This is not one of those books. The story is told so succinctly. It moves along at such an interesting pace that I think it works for this story, and the story is as long as it needed to be without needing anything else. And truthfully, as I've said before, this is a very jarring story. If you know anything about the story of like Death of a Salesman, I think it's by Arthur Miller. It is a play that talks about the fact that there's a main character, the main male character is older. He is this man who used to be a traveling salesman for years, and as he gets older and his kids especially start to get older, he realizes that the whole world is changing. You know, neighborhoods have changed, the amount of technology in the world has really changed the way that the door-to-door salesman career is kind of lined up, and the whole play is about him basically slowly descending into madness and insanity because he can't cope with the amount of changes that are happening. This is very similar to what happens to the main character, George, or as he's better known in the story as Bart. His name is George Barton Dawes, but he goes by Bart. That basically is what he goes through in this book, because the story is about how he has already lost a child. He has actually lost 2 children. One, his wife had miscarried, and their actual only child that they had given birth to, he ended up having a brain tumor and died at a very young age. And this is supposedly about 2 years or so after the death of their child. And George finds out basically that the town he lives in, which is an unnamed kind of Midwestern area town, he finds out that this town is planning on building this road that's going to basically be part of a new highway system. And unfortunately, that new construction is going to take over not only his business that he has been a part of for several years, is his livelihood, it is also going to be tearing down his actual home. And so he has to relocate. He's being forced to go through all these things. And you see very early on that Bart is not okay with any of it. He is very dead set against this whole thing happening, and you just basically see him slowly go madder and madder as the story goes on until ultimately the end of the story. And it's not a happy ending by any means, let me tell you. Like, this is not a happy story. This is not something that's meant to be rainbows and sunshine at the end of it. This is literally a story of watching a man go from basically his breaking point and just completely falling into madness and basically becoming suicidal and having a real inability to cope with this huge change when he's already dealt with so much leading up to this point. And while this is all happening, his marriage is falling apart. And I think that the reason too, I love the fact that the story is so brief and is perfectly sized for the kind of story it is because you're only following the story over the course of a couple of months. It is very easy a lot of times in stories that are only a couple of months to feel like things are rushed, or it's also entirely possible for things to feel like they're super drawn out over those 2 months. This book was perfectly down the middle. It felt like there was good pacing and good snapshots and little things here and there that helped bring the story along. I feel like he definitely was someone that I think a lot of people could relate to in a lot of ways when, you know, you feel like things have basically gone completely to shit and you feel like you can't cope with it. But just like with The Death of a Salesman, I feel like this is kind of a cautionary tale of sorts because we have people who in our lives that are having a hard time coping with things, having a hard time adjusting to big changes and all of that. And it's incredibly important, I think, in both stories, in Death of a Salesman and Roadwork, that we really understand that there are people that have massive struggles that we're not always aware of. So it is incredibly important that for those of you that may have family members or loved ones or friends that, you know, are struggling with something and it's apparent, there may be even more to that than you realize. And it's incredibly important that you reach out because, you know, they can't always reach out themselves. They might be afraid to reach out. They might be afraid because they feel like they're a burden. They might be afraid because they feel like nobody actually cares about them. Like, it's very important that if you notice that somebody is struggling with something, if they're going through some massive change or they're just having a really bad day sometimes, to just reach out and let them know that you know, you're there, because neither of these characters really had that, and they needed people to help them understand what's going on and help them cope. Something that I feel like if you really want to get a very different look at Stephen King, this is definitely something I would recommend because it's a little out there. It's a little strange considering everything that I've read up to Stephen King so far, because most of his stories have some kind of supernatural element to it. And this is like the most contemporary story that I've ever read by him because there is no supernatural element to this. This is literally just about watching a man go from bad to worse. So I feel like this is just a really interestingly executed and well executed story that I think just it's almost hard to really put into words what exactly the story did, because it's kind of one of those stories where you have to just read it for yourself and see how the story progresses, because me telling you anything really much more about it than I already have would spoil a lot of it. And I feel like this is just something you have to experience for yourself, because it is something that is just so different compared to everything he's written before. Truthfully, I feel like I can't really say much more about it again without spoiling anything. I also feel like there's not much else I can say that would, you know, maybe entice anyone to read it. But I will say, like I said, it's incredibly hard to read. It's very triggering for those of you that might have mental health issues. But I think in terms of my overall rating, I'm going to give this a 5 out of 5 stars. This is absolutely now one of my top 5 favorite books of Stephen King. I think I would even honestly say it's in my top 3, because I believe since I have started my reading series of Stephen King's books, this is only the 3rd book that I've come across that's a 5-star, or at the very least, this has just basically been bumped up into the top 3, and I don't remember what it would have, you know, necessarily knocked away. Thank you all so much for joining me in this video. If you guys did enjoy it, please do give it a big thumbs up and leave me a comment down below if you have read Roadwork yourself and what your thoughts were on it. Do you feel like you empathized with Bart and what he was going through? Do you feel like that he kind of took things way out of proportion? What are your thoughts on his wife? Did you feel like that she was completely justified in what she was feeling? Do you feel like kind of on the same level as me where it just seemed very odd for her to react in the way that she did? If you guys haven't already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock, and I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys.